All right. Let's dive into this whole Sebastian Stan thing. It's pretty wild, right?
Yeah, this one is it's got a lot of layers to unpack.
Our deep dive today, well, it all started with this new film Stan's in. He's the Winter Soldier guy from the Marvel movies.
Right, right. Most people probably know him from that.
Yeah, but now he's playing a young Donald Trump. In this biopic, it's all about Trump's early career.
And his relationship with Roy Cohn.
Yeah, his lawyer, Roy Cohn, who was well, he was a pretty controversial figure himself.
Oh yeah, Cohn was notorious, very powerful, and let's just say not afraid of bending the rules.
So this film, it really doesn't hold back. It portrays Trump. Well, it portrays him in a pretty negative light.
It's definitely a critical portrayal, not a flattering one for sure.
And the crazy thing is, Stan is saying other actors, like he couldn't get other actors to be in the movie with him.
Well, not just in the movie itself, I mean, to even talk about it.
Seriously.
Yeah, like to promote it. He said he couldn't even get anyone to appear with him on a talk show. Yeah, Variety magazine, they do these actor segments. Pretty standard promo stuff. But actors, or I guess their agents and publicists, were flat out refusing. They
Right.
wouldn't be paired with him, all because of the Trump connection.
So it's not even about like supporting the film or its message or anything?
No, they just didn't want to be associated with it at all.
That's kind of crazy. I mean, I know Hollywood can be very, political,
Oh, for sure. It definitely leans in a certain direction.
but this is like next level, isn't it?
It's definitely unusual. You don't see this kind of avoidance very often.
Makes you wonder if it's straight up fear, right?
Could be. I mean, fear of backlash, maybe career repercussions, who knows?
Yeah, like alienating certain audiences.
Possibly. Could be a mix of all those things.
It's strange, though, because Hollywood has always tackled political themes, right? I mean, tons of movies and shows get into controversial topics.
Oh, absolutely. It's always been part of storytelling.
So what do you think makes this situation different?
I think you have to consider, well, the political climate,
Hmm.
it's still incredibly polarized, even years after Trump's presidency.
Yeah, for sure.
Any project even remotely connected to him, especially one that's critical, like this biopic, it's just going to spark intense reactions.
And it did. Trump, he called the film, a cheap, defamatory hatchet job. Pretty strong words.
He didn't hold back, that's for sure.
And he even called the filmmakers human scum, I think.
Yeah, it was a pretty harsh statement.
Talk about throwing fuel on the fire. Yeah.
It definitely got people talking, that's for sure.
But it's interesting. His reaction, it kind of plays right into what the film seems to be about.
In a way, yeah, it's like he's proving their point.
One of the film's core themes, Stan has said, is like the danger of just dismissing controversial figures without actually trying to understand, what makes them appealing.
Right, it's easy to just write someone off as bad or wrong. But that doesn't really help us understand the bigger picture.
Exactly. And Stan also said the film really digs into the whole Roy Cohn influence, how Cohn shaped Trump's persona and tactics.
Cohn was all about manipulation, aggression, no-holds-barred kind of stuff. The film explores how that rubbed off on Trump and his approach to dealing with opponents.
So Trump's outrage, it actually draws more attention to these themes.
Yeah, it gets people thinking about the film and what it's trying to say.
Even if they don't agree with it.
Exactly. It's provoking discussion, which is often what art aims to do.
It's kind of wild how that works, right? Like our gut reaction to something, especially if it's anger, it can actually play right into the hands of what we're reacting against.
It's almost like a predictable response, and someone's using that to their advantage.
Makes you think, right?
Nice.
About how much of our behavior is, well, maybe not so free after all.
It's a good question to ask ourselves. Are we really in control, or are we being played?
Okay, so we've got this film stirring things up in Hollywood, actors practically running away from it, Trump fuming. But what does it all mean for us, the viewers?
What's the takeaway? Well, I think one big one is this. We need to understand how figures like Trump, flaws and all, how they still resonate with a lot of people.
It's easy to just dismiss them, but that doesn't really get us anywhere.
No, it doesn't help us understand the complexities of their appeal.
And this film, it's pushing us to look beyond those surface judgments, right?
To dig deeper into the nuances of Trump's rise and to really grapple with what that says about society as a whole.
Yeah, it's like we always say, understanding something doesn't mean you agree with it.
Right, right. It's about getting the full picture.
Sometimes to really counter something, or even just to get it, you have to get into the messy stuff, the stuff you might not like.
Exactly. It's about stepping outside of your comfort zone.
And speaking of uncomfortable, there's this one scene in the film, it's gotten a lot of attention, and I think it's what really set Trump off.
You're talking about the scene with Ivana, right?
Yeah, where Trump is, it depicts him assaulting his ex-wife, Ivana.
That's the one that seems to have pushed his buttons the most.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when those allegations first came out. It was huge, a big scandal.
It definitely dominated the headlines for a while.
And Trump has always denied it completely. So to see it portrayed on screen, I mean, that must have been infuriating.
It's understandable why he'd be upset, but it also raises some interesting questions.
About what?
Well, about the boundaries of artistic licenses, especially when you're dealing with a real person, someone who's still alive and in the public eye.
Yeah, that's tricky territory for sure.
Where do you draw the line between portraying something that's dramatically relevant and potentially damaging someone's reputation?
That's a tough one. Is like, on the one hand, filmmakers, they have a right to explore these themes, right? To present their interpretation, even if the events are disputed.
Right, artistic freedom and all that.
But then there's also the responsibility to be truthful
Yeah.
and to not just exploit real-life trauma for shock value.
It's about finding that balance, which isn't always easy.
And that's where it gets really interesting with this film. How do we even define truthful in this situation, especially with someone as polarizing as Trump?
Truth can be very slippery, especially when you're dealing with subjective experiences and conflicting accounts of what actually happened.
Like, is it purely about factual accuracy?
Or is there room for emotional truth, even if it diverges from the literal events?
It's a tricky question.
And the reactions to that scene really highlight that.
Trump supporters will probably see it as a complete fabrication, an attempt to smear him to make him look bad.
Right, they'll likely dismiss it entirely.
But his detractors might see it as, well, a reflection of his character, even if it's uncomfortable to watch.
And that's why I think this film is so fascinating. It forces us to acknowledge that there are multiple truths, multiple perspectives.
And that our own biases, they totally shape how we see those truths.
Absolutely. Our own experiences, beliefs, values, it all colors our perception of events.
It's like that saying, where you stand depends on where you sit.
Exactly. Our positionality influences everything.
So with this film, it's not just about what's on screen. It's about how we're interpreting it, based on all our own baggage.
And that's a powerful realization, I think.
It's a reminder that we can't just pick and choose the facts that fit our narrative.
We have to grapple with the full picture, even the parts we don't like.
Even the parts that make us uncomfortable or challenge our beliefs.
That's the hard part, but it's also where real growth happens.
It's so much easier to just stick with what we already know, what feels safe.
To stay in our echo chambers, surrounded by people who agree with us.
But that doesn't really help us move forward, does it?
No, it keeps us stuck in these limited perspectives.
It takes courage to step outside of those comfort zones.
To confront something that might shake up our worldview.
And that's where the power of art lies, right?
It can challenge us, provoke us, force us to face uncomfortable truths.
Truths about ourselves, about the world.
And sometimes those truths are messy, complicated, with no easy answers.
It's like holding up a mirror to society, saying, hey, this is us. This is what we're capable of. Now what?
But not everyone wants to look in that mirror, that's for sure.
No, it's much easier to look away, to pretend those things don't exist.
But that avoidance, it comes at a cost.
What do you mean?
It prevents us from having those difficult conversations.
From really understanding different perspectives.
And ultimately, from finding solutions to the problems we face.
This whole Sebastian Stan thing, it's really got me thinking about my own relationship with, well, with challenging topics.
In what way?
Like, how often do I shy away from conversations that make me uncomfortable? How much do my own biases shape how I see things?
Those are good questions to ask yourself. They're not always easy to answer.
They are tough, but it's important, right?
Absolutely. It's how we grow, how we evolve as individuals and as a society.
So how do we do it? How do we navigate this world where truth feels so subjective and every conversation seems to have these political landmines?
It's definitely a challenge, but I think it starts with curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yeah, instead of judgment, what if we approach these conversations with genuine curiosity?
What do you mean?
Instead of trying to prove our point or shut down opposing views, what if we actually tried to understand where the other person is coming from?
That sounds good, but it's so hard to do. Especially these days, everyone's so on edge, ready to argue.
It's true. The climate is tense, but I think it comes down to this. We have to remember that we're all human beings.
With our own experiences, our own perspectives.
And just because someone sees things differently than us, it doesn't mean they're bad or malicious.
It's about finding that common humanity, even amidst our differences.
Exactly. That's the key. But it takes effort.
So how do we even begin to do that when the divisions feel so deep, the anger so real?
That's a question we'll explore further in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, looking forward to it.
We'll delve into some specific strategies for navigating those difficult conversations and for finding that common ground, even in the most polarized environments. We'll also discuss how this film, The Apprentice, offers some valuable insights into the psychology of persuasion and the importance of critical thinking in this world of information overload.
Yeah, it's like everyone's got an opinion these days, and they're not afraid to shout it out.
Oh yeah, everyone's got a platform now.
But finding that common ground, man, that seems tough.
It's a skill, for sure, one we need to work on.
Especially now.
Especially now.
One thing this film, The Apprentice, really highlights is how easily we can be manipulated.
Oh, absolutely. Roy Cohn was a master of it.
And the film shows how he used those tactics.
To build his career, to influence people like Trump.
So are you saying we're all just pawns in some big game?
Not necessarily pawns, but we are influenced, for sure.
By things we might not even realize.
Think about it. Where do we get our information?
Social media, the news, the people around us.
A lot of that is carefully curated. It's not a neutral flow.
Yeah, I catch myself doing that too, seeking out stuff that confirms what I already believe.
It's comfortable. It's validating.
But it doesn't really challenge me to grow, does it?
And that's where the film's message about critical thinking comes in.
So it's not just about blindly accepting what we're told.
No, it's about questioning those narratives, examining the evidence.
Forming our own conclusions, even if they're uncomfortable.
Exactly, and that's not always easy.
So how do we do that? Become more discerning, especially when everyone seems to have an agenda.
It's about diversifying our sources, for one.
Not just sticking to one news outlet or one social media echo chamber.
Exactly. Expose yourself to different perspectives.
Even the ones you might not agree with at first.
It's about getting the full picture.
But it's overwhelming sometimes, right? It's like a swamp of information out there.
That's where those critical thinking skills are so important.
So we can wade through it all and not get lost.
Learn to identify bias in a news article, a social media post, even in a conversation.
How do you even do that?
Ask yourself some key questions.
Like what?
Who's saying this? What's their motivation? What evidence are they using?
So it's about being more aware, more skeptical.
Don't take everything at face value. Dig a little deeper.
Don't just assume what you see is the whole truth.
And it takes practice. It's a muscle you have to build.
Where do we even start?
Start by questioning your own assumptions.
My own biases.
What biases do you bring to the table? What information are you clinging to? Just because it feels good.
Okay, so we examine ourselves first.
Once you start questioning your own beliefs, you'll be more open to questioning others.
Makes sense. It's easy to get trapped in those echo chambers.
Surrounded by people who just agree with you all the time.
Yeah, it feels safe, but it doesn't really challenge us.
And that's why talking to people who hold different views is so important.
Even if it gets heated.
It's not about winning an argument. It's about listening.
Trying to understand their perspective, finding that sliver of common ground.
It's the only way to bridge those divides.
It all comes back to being open, doesn't it? Open to different perspectives, even if they make us squirm a bit.
It's about being willing to learn, to grow, to change our minds.
And that's a lifelong process, right?
It never really ends. The more we learn, the more we realize we don't know.
That's kind of humbling, but also exciting.
It keeps us engaged, keeps us curious.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all this?
I hope they're inspired to embrace those uncomfortable truths, to question their own assumptions, and to talk to people who see things differently.
Even if it's tough.
It's not easy, but it's how we build a more understanding world.
That's a great message. It's about connection, isn't it?
Even amidst our differences.
And remember, even if you don't agree with everything you hear, just the act of engaging, of thinking critically, that helps us grow.
Keep questioning, keep learning, keep the conversation going.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.